Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development. By and with Uli Vogel. A very warm welcome to Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development, episode number 13. Our second season, as we've called it. I'm Uli Vogel, and I'll be guiding you through today's episode. The first 12, the first season, covered various topics we know from HR, but also other things like innovation, flexibility, always with a value behind them. And now the second season with 12 episodes features one content-focused episode followed by an episode with a matching guest each time. For example, in episode 14, Gabrielle Traxel will be my interview partner who has been working with profiling values for a long time. We'll have Christoph Meyer here, Stefan Kohler from the Southeast Bavaria Clinics, and others too. Bertram Casper will also grace us with his presence. He now hosts and runs a very well-known podcast called Aging with Serenity. Let's get to today's episode, titled, What Assessments Really Are. Well, I think I can share a bit about that, since I dove into this topic 25 years ago, back then at the company Mercury Erval, which still exists today, a Swedish management consultancy that placed a lot of value on actually mapping and measuring, so to speak, people's personality traits, and not just relying on knowledge and experience from industries or education, but actually looking closely at the person. And that already impressed me back then and was always fun, actually. And back then, after my university days, it was the only position I actually got an interview for, and then it moved on to the assessment. And this assessment was so impressive to me that, at the end, well, it was my future boss back then who conducted the assessment with me, gave feedback at the end and really managed to tease out my innermost self, and, basically turned me inside out and knew me very, very well. And that was another reason for me to say, I want to join this company. They invest in people. And at the same time, I wanted to be able to do that myself. I wanted to be able to show people where their strengths and development areas lie, and not just based on a gut feeling, but in a structured way. And, in those 25 years, I've probably conducted well over 5,000 individual assessments by now, but of course, we learned it back then in the group of newcomers at Mercury Erval, and my mentor there was Dr. Albert Nussbaum, who led the company in Germany for a very long time and who really didn't just explain the methodology in the psychometric instrument field to us, but also explained exactly how to conduct interviews, how to make decisions, how to do reporting, and things like that. But maybe let's start from the beginning. Assessment, what is that exactly? It comes from the Anglo-Saxon linguistic area and means something like evaluation or appraisal, but by now it's actually become very, very well established in the German-speaking world. We have other terms that are used: potential analysis, situational analysis, management audit. So there are many variations. Ultimately there are also assessment centers, which represent the artificial, environmental conditions, so to speak, where you're then also evaluated in groups, and so on, with observers. To be honest, that was never, quite my thing. It's also going out of style a bit because it's just very, very costly when you actually have to get many people together in one place, For me, individual assessments were actually always the more appealing ones and ultimately also, I think, the more respectful ones. So, going into details like this, in the interview then, into certain difficult situations or even entire life phases and life decisions that I always thought, no, the one-on-one situation is actually the better, the appropriate one. And, what's the best way to proceed with such individual assessments? I, once, wrote an article about it in the, Performance, HR Performance magazine. It was a few years ago. I like to call it the double three-step process in the execution. What do I mean by that? First of all, the upper three-step process is the one where the first step is about the briefing, about the situation and the objectives. So, if you're an assessment service provider, you need the client for that. What is it even about? Is a sales manager position being filled now? Or, are we within the framework of a high-potential program, to find out who is allowed to, participate in it, or not? Or are we, perhaps dealing with an internal, appointment? Or is it just about a fundamental, well, let's say, development perspective? So, it could be many different, situations, and this briefing, must of course be able to provide answers, to that. And, it's also important to go a bit deeper with the client, to understand the strategy behind it, right, the organizational structure. Organizational structure, what are the actual requirements for the position, right? What kind of requirement profile can you, develop accordingly, and very important is also the, preliminary communication. That's, one of the most important things, or where you can go very wrong. If you have good people, promising candidates, and you tell them, well, now you have to take a test, then that can already be the end of it. So, here it's about making an investment in a candidate, or a manager, or a staff member in the company, and the company itself. So, a win-win situation should come out of it by simply finding out more precisely what qualities, what skills, what potential, and also what inclinations a person has. So, first the briefing on the situation and objectives with preliminary communication. Very important point, so that you even know what it's all about, and the second step in the upper three-step process is then the execution. I'll say a few more things about that in a moment, because that's where the second three-step process begins. And, the third, step in the upper, three-step process is then the evaluation and reporting. So, in my opinion, reporting is very important, that you report back to the client accordingly, and in my view, you should definitely do that in writing. In that case, it's then just, well, forever. Yes, what's written remains here. Often it is, supplemented orally between the lines, once more. And yes, if necessary, if it was a larger group, perhaps also aggregated to, represent a whole team. If necessary, yes, development plan might be part of the reporting, depending on how the whole thing is set up. And, if necessary, there's also an action plan right away. So, we have the upper three-step process, briefing, situation, and objectives, execution of the assessment, and then the evaluation and reporting. And now I'll take a slightly closer look at the execution, how that, works, and there's another three-step process in there. First of all, the first thing is always a psychometric questionnaire or also a valuemetric, online questionnaire, like profiling values, also has. And, if necessary, further information is also, collected online. At Mercury Erval, we actually, always filled out a relatively comprehensive questionnaire there. It went, I'd say, from recording the current organizational structure, to certain aspects, that are desired in terms of results in the current job, activities that are there, all the way to, yes, sentence completions. Actually, I always found that to be a very, very good way to get additional information back then. And then, however, the most important part in the inner three-step process, so to speak, once these written things or online things are completed, is to go, into the in-depth interview. And, that's quite, something, and I'll maybe say a bit more about that separately in a moment, to, be able to go deeper here. And, after the interview, it's always part of it, respect demands it, as does, well, the investment and the fact that someone has opened up so much, to follow up with direct personal feedback, as well. So the internal three-step process, psychometric questionnaire or valuemetric one, with potentially further written, information, then the in-depth interview, and finally the personal feedback. Yes, the in-depth interview, is quite intense. Why do I say that? Sure, you can go ahead and just construct a questionnaire, here and work through it, but, from a certain hierarchical level or a certain level, of people, that's simply not appropriate, right? Rather, the art is essentially to let a kind of business conversation naturally emerge at a high level, where the participant, of the assessment interview, in fact, actually opens up and shares their thoughts, and also has the feeling that, the consultant truly understands them, break time equals 0.5s/, so they can engage at a high level accordingly. That's why it's also important to learn something about the company beforehand in the briefing. What might be currently going on, what the most important points and questions are. Otherwise, you're clueless there. And with this start of the interview, it's maybe also very important to take to heart, not just to listen and say yes, when someone starts gushing and throwing acronyms around and showing off their industry knowledge, so to speak. Jump in immediately if things aren't understood. Try to listen actively, to paraphrase, because otherwise you'll get left behind and later in the interview, when, things come up that were said at the beginning, then you'll look like a fool. So it's not that easy, I'd say, to get to the level of being able to conduct such interviews well, but you have to be extremely alert, take things in, take good notes at the same time, naturally observe the person too, and also make notes on maybe certain behaviors or certain hypotheses that you already want to, use with a view to the evaluation later on. So I always find an assessment interview like that is actually a peak performance. You have to open the person up, ask relevant things, learn important things. At the same time, you have a certain raw profile from the psychometric questionnaire or, in our case at profiling values, the evaluation, the report. And of course, you also try to cross-check what is correct from the algorithm. What can one perhaps call into question? And if I look at the structure of the interview, then you can of course make it fine and sophisticated. I'll give a few pointers on that in a moment, but you can also break it down very, very simply at first. And for me, that basically always means, where does someone come from? Where are they now? And where does someone want to go in the future? So these basic steps, origin, the present here, what is the current situation? Often, very exciting when it's about a job change, and then also when you extrapolate your life, which direction should it go in? What are the strategic threads that are involved there? And now you can of course go ahead and say, tell me a bit about yourself. And then you might be talked at for a while. That's not how I do it. As a rule, you have a document, you have a resume in front of you. And for me, I usually tell the candidates this right at the beginning. I'm interested in finding out why someone made certain decisions in their life, why they were drawn to this or that. So the reasons, for, the life turns as well, and how the life path unfolded, that's very, very important to me. And then often, I also pick out situations where there might have been a particularly difficult leadership situation or something similar, or even a difficult company situation, and then ask accordingly how the person mastered or handled certain things. Right, so first the why, then the how, and that's often where the values become clear that the person has and that drive them. And yes, then of course I also ask about current events. What's on the table? What are the things that are currently pending that need to be done? And then the planning, the future is of course also an important aspect. And you can of course build yourself a template so that you've basically covered everything. I made such a template for myself once, or rather, I keep updating it. So, what the subject areas of this business conversation, of this assessment interview actually are. There, the business itself is of course also important in order to understand it, the problems, the tasks, also the strategic aspects and goals that then actually become relevant in this position we're talking about. But things like the supervisor are also important, the superior, what goals and tasks are on the table here, what personality traits supervisors actually have, what leadership styles. That's a fundamental question that I often ask, and what the relationship to that is like. Also is, and then, if it's a larger group, you can of course go into corporate management, international aspects, and also, political aspects of an organization. And then there are always the points, I just touched on them, what critical situations were there, problem areas, and that's how you learn, like in a blueprint, how to navigate everything but ultimately keep the conversation flowing well. and then feedback immediately following. By then, I've usually already made a few notes, a sketch, pulled a few points together, so that I can score points somewhere with 3 to 5 main points. In the sense that I say, these are now the most important findings directly from, on the one hand the algorithm, what was done in psychometrics, but above all, how it was then enriched in the interview. And thus also to provide an outlook. And the oral feedback is really more about the person taking something away directly and feeling like, if I pay attention to that, I can improve. The report afterwards, the written one, is also very much about the specifications and requirements that were ultimately demanded in the briefing. So feedback is twofold, once very personal at the end of the conversation as the final part, and then in writing in the sense of putting it all on paper in a highly professional way, right to the point. So, that's perhaps a little episode from my experiences with assessments. I'm looking forward to visiting Gabby Traxel in the next episode, that she visits us and I can conduct an interview with her. She had, a really interesting and somewhat unique career path, and she has actually been living and working in Switzerland for quite a few years now. She trains top managers, helping them develop their skills and abilities so that they can be fully prepared for important assessments and assessment centers. But more on that in the episode itself with Gabby. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you'll continue to join us for the second season of our Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development.